A tiny country in Central America attracts as many critics as admirers. So is El Salvador a poster child for transformation or a dangerous experiment in human rights violations and unorthodox economics? El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele has managed to transform the nation from the world's murder capital to a safe haven. But what some describe as his success, others call a formula for an autocratic disaster. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is El Salvador. Well, in spite of a population of just 6.5 million people, plus nominal influence on the global stage, El Salvador punches way above its weight when it comes to attention from the global press. Much of that attention focuses on human rights issues. The country used to be infamous for violent gang crime and record murder rates. Statistics President Nayib Bukele promised to forever change. And most argue he has. But detractors say he's replaced crime and murder rates with a record-high prison population and a 4-year state of emergency that suspends constitutional law, including crucial freedom of the press. Dozens of journalists critical of Bukele have fled the country, they say under threat of imprisonment and harassment. Here's a look now at how El Salvador cleaned up crime and what it's cost.
El Salvador did what much of Latin America thought impossible. It broke the power of the gangs. But it did so by dramatically expanding the power of the state itself.
We went from being the most dangerous country in the world to the safest in the entire continent. Hopefully, we will become the safest in the world.
4 years into a state of emergency, El Salvador has undergone one of the most aggressive security crackdowns in the modern Americas. Emergency powers dramatically expanded the reach of police and the military, allowing mass arrests on a scale rarely seen in the region. Tens of thousands have since been detained in a prison system built around a single objective: removing gangs permanently from public life. And for many Salvadorians, the changes feel immediate.
There is more security. I feel calmer. I can go for a walk. I go out to walk every night with my young children around the neighborhood. Before, I didn't even take them out. I can work calmer. I can go everywhere.
But the crackdown did not stop at the streets. It transformed the legal system alongside them. Courts now process large groups of defendants together under emergency procedures critics say have weakened the due process and narrowed the space for individual defense. Constitutional protections suspended in 2022 remain suspended today, while rights groups argue that innocent people have been absorbed into a system designed for speed, scale, and permanent pressure.
They simply come to the house, ask for the person, and say they are taking them to a police station to ask a question. Back at home, that person had not committed any crime, but by the time they reached the station, they had already been charged with illicit association.
Families say the consequences now reach far beyond prisons: children growing up without parents, households losing income, and emergency rule slowly becoming part of the country's political fabric. The crackdown has continued to widen, with new laws allowing life sentences even for minors convicted of serious crimes, while accelerating large-scale prosecutions across the country.
I'd rather be called a dictator than watch them kill Salvadorans in the streets.
At the same time, journalists who investigated alleged past negotiations between Bukele's government and gangs say pressure on critical reporting has intensified, and several now continue their work in exile. El Salvador's transformation has made Nayib Bukele one of the most closely watched leaders in the region, with governments across Latin America openly discussing versions of the so-called Bukele Model. To supporters, the crackdown gave El Salvador something it had lost long ago: the ability to live without fear. To critics, it concentrated extraordinary power in the hands of the state, with few limits and no clear endpoint. And the debate now surrounding El Salvador is no longer about crime, but about what a country is willing to become in order to defeat it.
So some say El Salvador has never been better, but others argue this is actually an ominous time and the prelude to a dangerous dictatorship. Well, recently I sat down with Felix Ulloa, the vice president of El Salvador. He insists critics have failed to understand the unique circumstances and history of his country, and that only unorthodox methods could turn the world's murder capital into a safe place.
The gangs, when we took office on June 2019, they were controlling most of the national territory. And the rate of murder, as you said, was the highest in the world. But now, after 4 years of the state of exception, and when we declared the war against the gangs, based in the international humanitarian law, in the jus ad bellum, which is the right of the states, of the government, to declare the war to defend the population or the territory when they are attacked. So after this, the balance is that we have now more than 1,180 days without zero homicide. We use the law. We're respecting the rule of law. We use the imperium of the government to deal with them, and we use the justice to keep these people where they belong, which is in the prisons. So sometimes, as you said, El Salvador has been taken as a model for other nations, other countries in the region. For instance, Argentina, the Minister of Interior of Argentina came with his team to visit El Salvador for 1 week in order to study our process. I met with the Minister of Interior, Minister of Defense of Ecuador. They want to come to El Salvador to study as a case study. And different other countries, they have asked for our technical support, technical assistance, in order to make them happen exactly what we are doing in El Salvador. And because that is now in the front page worldwide, say, putting El Salvador as a model, and they start calling the Bukele Model in order to make bring it back the peace to the communities, giving the harmony at the communities, and giving to the people a normal life. Because as the President said, what we are doing is living in a normal society, just allowing the kids to play on the streets, people that go to the public places, things like that were impossible during the period when the gangs controlled the country.
But for all the achievements you say you've made, and I know you're very proud of them, on the other side, you've received the same amount, really, if not more, of the negative press for what has happened to human rights in the country. You say the 4 years of the state of emergency is part of the laws you're enacting, but many people argue you're actually suspending the rule of law and putting it into the hands of too few people who are abusing their power, and now it's become too much. You've now passed a law that's allowing the sentencing of children as young as 12 years old to life in prison. Aren't you just sentencing your country then to a massive and arguably unsustainable prison population?
Easy answer. The people who criticize us is because they don't know what's going on in El Salvador. They ignore the kind of law that we are implementing. We didn't enact an amendment in the Constitution to punish the youth or neither the childhood. When you're talking about children from 12 years old, it's not the children of the Austrian chorus, or it's not the Boy Scouts.
They're still children.
Well, they're still children, but if you want to defeat terrorism, you have to act as in that way. Otherwise, you cannot defeat it, never. The state of exemption, the state of emergency, affected just two constitutional guarantees. No one single public liberty was affected, neither is affected today, nor was affected when we enacted the fact. So that's why most of the population, 95% of the Salvadorian people are satisfied, and they wanted, and they called the government to extend every month the state of emergency. People who live abroad, that they never suffer. This fact is the one that criticize us, but the population, the Salvadorian, they are satisfied. And that's what the President Bukele says. We governed for Salvadorian people, not for NGOs based in Washington or in London, or not for the outlet that criticize us, like the New York Times, El País de Spain, Le Monde, BBC.
I understand your perspective, but 4 years of a state of emergency, do you want it to end?
Yeah, of course you want to end.
When will it end?
When the conditions that's created are disappear. And you know, when the people said, oh, you have 4 years with the state of exception, I can tell you that I live in the 87 years of a state of emergency during the Civil War. So for us, it's nothing that can affect the normal life of the citizen. It is only affecting the gang's member.
The problem is here, and this was my original question, is you are creating, again, a massive prison population.
Yeah.
You're not just imprisoning your own people and starting to imprison them from younger and younger in age, so that it will become more and more difficult to ever reform them, to make them productive members of society. They'll probably just have to stay there for life. Where does that leave the population of El Salvador?
You see, we have created the largest facilities to keep these people on the prison. It is the Center for Contention of Terrorism. So we have them for those who are accused and condemned of being terrorists. It's not for the common criminals. And the program, the rehabilitation of the criminals at large, we have a program which is called Zero Ocio, which means that they are working, creating facilities for the schools. They work in the schools to rebuild the school. They work to create tailors, carpenters, bakers for themselves. So the idea of rehabilitation comes and is implemented for the common people. But the application of these measures are for terrorists. And the number is not a massive, it's 91,000. When you see on the upside down your perspective, you will see that we are in prison 91,000. So that means that with this action, the government has liberated 99% of the population.
So some people see it as a net positive, others see it as this negative, because you went from being the murder capital of the world to kind of the incarceration capital of the world. But in essence, you are comfortable with a certain level of injustice because you know innocent people are falling through the cracks. There's a level of injustice in order to guarantee security. That's simply the price you have to pay, correct?
Absolutely. And you know, as we said, the perfect is enemy of the good. And we are doing really good things. So, but we are not perfect. And the margin of error is less than 10%. Like around 8,000 people has been released because they prove in court that they didn't belong to the gangs or they didn't work for the gangs. But the rest of them, they are under the justice system and are the judge who decide if they are innocent or are guilty. So it's not the government.
Okay, I understand. I mean, many of you say you've created a police state, and Bukele says your president says he's the coolest dictator in the world. Still a dictatorship, even if it serves its purpose, as you feel it is right now, people are very scared of the long term and the prospect that he might not leave office. Do you think that's a good thing?
Because I mean, it depends. It depends because you want to be for life president of a country, but it depends on the population. A dictator is the one who get office and keep in office by force. But when is the people who elected you and re-elected you and they want you to be there, that's the democracy works.
But you plan to have fair and transparent elections?
Absolutely, no doubt, because we are the most observed election.
What though about your President Bukele's relationship then with U.S. President Trump? I mean, this cooperation on the deportation of U.S. detainees via Sikot prison, it's been loathed, as you know, by human rights organizations, but praised by the Bukele administration as well as the Trump administration. Still, though, some are very worried that these very close ties with the Trump administration could actually prove a liability for El Salvador and for your president in the future.
Not El Salvador, because El Salvador is a sovereign nation, and we don't want to be involved in domestic politics in the state, because this is a matter of the Democrats and Republicans in the United States. We don't want to be involved in that. And what we did with those prisoners were not American citizens, they were Venezuela, members of the Train of Aragua, that they were sent.
Allegedly.
Yeah,
Allegedly.
Absolutely. But that was only one action that was taken. And it was because Venezuela refused to receive them, and the administration of the state didn't want them in the American soil. So we accepted because they offered to pay for having them in our prison. But then they get an agreement. The Venezuela government released some political prisoners, and then President Trump said, okay, those who are in San Salvador be sent to Venezuela. So that's it.
Well, El Salvador's Vice President Felix Ulloa there. Now, it's not just human rights issues that are controversial in El Salvador. There's also the question of its economy. President Bukele made the nation the first in the world to adopt Bitcoin as an official currency, in spite of no support from organizations like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. Here's a look at how El Salvador's Bitcoin experiment is holding up.
In 2021, El Salvador made history by becoming the first country in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. The tech-embracing president, Nayib Bukele, argued that adoption of Bitcoin would attract international investment and improve the fortunes of citizens. The country already had some experience in alternate currencies. Just 2 decades prior, it officially adopted the US dollar to replace its own, one of only a small number of countries worldwide that has done so. El Salvador's economy has, for years, been dependent on remittances for up to a quarter of its economic income. In 2023, money sent back by El Salvador citizens working in the United States alone reached $8.2 billion. But several years after making Bitcoin legal tender, the experiment hasn't quite paid off in the way it was hoped. Some locals overcame their initial hesitancy and unfamiliarity with the cryptocurrency.
Bitcoin has been very good, and it's been very easy. It's a legal tender. It's very easy for everybody to use it. For me, it's been very good because I also have the opportunity to be able to charge foreigners somehow much easier and faster.
But others never embraced it in big numbers.
I don't think this Bitcoin adoption is a good thing. I don't know anything about it. So how am I going to be in agreement with this currency? I haven't seen any photos of it. We are okay with the dollar.
And it was criticized both internationally and at home for its volatility. Regular and reliable access to the internet, another crucial ingredient for Bitcoin usage, is something many in El Salvador lack. According to one university opinion poll, the percentage of Salvadorans who reported using Bitcoins for transactions declined from slightly over 25% in 2021 to around 8% in 2024. And in mid-December of 2024, the International Monetary Fund agreed to loan El Salvador $1.4 billion. But the loan had strings attached. Among them, crypto could no longer be compulsory, and the private sector could make it voluntary only. And its use in the public sector had to be limited. El Zonte, the so-called Bitcoin beach, is more of a coastal novelty than a juggernaut. While Bitcoin City, the plan that Bukele wanted to develop into a cryptocurrency utopia, failed to launch. Despite this, Bukele hasn't abandoned his belief in Bitcoin, regularly purchasing more Bitcoins as well as gold since then.
So while El Salvador's transition to Bitcoin has been slow, the government fully believes it's way ahead of the curve in moving toward a crypto economy. But others say the president is basically taking the national finances to a casino. One Bloomberg journalist posted on X that risking El Salvador's program with the IMF for a Bitcoin obsession makes no sense. President Nayib Bukele needs a reality check. Well, here's the position of El Salvador's Vice President Felix Ulloa.
We get an agreement with the IMF because when that way we enact a law on September 2023 approving the Bitcoin as a legal tender. And there we were punished. We were graded in the lower parts, CCC. And after President Trump's government announced that they will create a reserve in the Federal Reserve with the cryptocurrency, immediately the IMF started dealing with us. We get a common ground, and they approve a loan for $3,000 million to El Salvador. Now this is an execution of the program. The issue was that they make the case that they said was we have to stop dealing with the Bitcoin as a mandatory currency. And we accepted, we modified the law. And secondly, they said, you cannot pay taxes with Bitcoin, and we accepted. Those were the two conditions. And we amended the law, and then we started, the cash flow was started moving now. So we are in good relation with them. The issue that the President Bukele is still buying Bitcoin, which is part of our sovereignty, and because he said we don't have gold, because the previous government, they sold all our reserve in gold. So we have the Bitcoin as a reserve. And we have more than 5,000 Bitcoin in our reserve.
So you're saying you don't believe as some would criticize, your country is at the mercy of what is effectively a very volatile asset that some have actually called a black hole for public finance. And the proof was, let's be fair, the proof was really supposed to be that it was working in substituting any currency with cryptocurrency. You were supposed to be able to pay with Bitcoin. It isn't working properly. The cities you were supposed to be creating around Bitcoin haven't even started being developed yet. Do you still have that plan, that utopia for cryptocurrency?
It's not what I am thinking. It's the way that the world is moving forward. I mean, the economy is moving that digital currency will be in the future. And the fiat money, like the dollar, euro, sterling, pound, all those probably will disappear. So the wisdom of the President Bukele is to understand where is the movement, because sooner than later you will be using Bitcoins or another cryptocurrency. If you are not in this new world, you will never understand. Like the people that they refuse to accept the check because they said, is this a piece of paper? Or they refuse to have a credit card because they said it's a piece of plastic.
When will we see the Bitcoin city powered by the volcano?
We already start selling the bonus, the volcano bonus, in order to collect the fund. But the first step has done. We are building the new airport, which will be close to the Bitcoin city. It is a couple kilometers away. So that was the first step. And then we will see all the development with the Bitcoin country, because we will be Bitcoin country. And it is something that President Bukele used to compare. He said, it's not the size of El Salvador who will put us on the vanguard, as a pioneer. Because look at Singapore. Singapore fits 26 times in El Salvador. And you see the GDP of Singapore. So it's not a matter of having a large territory. It's a matter of leadership, a matter of management, a matter of vision.
Okay, so what's the time scale then, very quickly?
I don't know, it probably will take a couple of years.
A couple years?
Probably to have, because and this is another step that the government has taken. It is try to set up the land where the city will be built, because some land belongs to the state, some land belongs to the municipalities, and other are private land. So we are defining the area where the city will be built and get all the legal procedures in order to start building the city. And that will be another issue. The energy for the city will come from the volcano, Conchagua volcano. So that's what the bonus is called, volcano bonus, because that will serve under the volcano energy that will be provided. All the energy, either for the airport and also for the city.
And by the way, you're not worried about the thousands of El Salvadorans being sent back to El Salvador from the United States, who not only will need to find a place in your economy to be productive, to start earning money and be productive citizens of El Salvador again, plus the remittances that El Salvador is going to be losing from those who are working in the United States.
Yeah. The President Bukele has called now the reverse migration, because many Salvadorians that they achieve the American dream. When they emigrate, they work hard, they educate their children, they make some savings, and now they are coming back to El Salvador following the Salvadorian dream. And according to the last report of the Central Bank of El Salvador, more than $1 billion has been taken from Salvadorian, the diaspora, to be invested in El Salvador. Right. So we don't worry about that. On the contrary, we are opening them all the ways in order that they can manage their money, because the bank, all the private banks, they were very concerned, very close-minded to accept the money of the people who came from the state, because they say they have not any record on the banks. So we are telling now that it should be open the way that the Salvadorian returning to the country with the saving, with small capital, will be invested in their communities.
El Salvador's Vice President Felix Ulloa there. Now, it is cliche to say, but only time will tell how this small corner of Central America will fare in the future. If its leaders are right, it could serve as a model for others to emulate, or it could prove a dark warning of how too much power and risk can go wrong. Well, that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers. Thanks so much for watching. And don't forget, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.